Start
Well, while
my.
you do that, Todd, I'm going to go ahead and get us started and we'll get ready for you. Just to introduce everybody, I'm the first installment here of NAFB Academy in 2024. I'm your host, Michael Clements, your news service editor. I'm certainly not the star of today's show. That's going to be Todd and Jesse. But before we get started, just a big thank you to those guys and the others that have helped put on NAFB Academy. This is really a member-driven effort, folks volunteering their time, resources, their knowledge all throughout this. So Todd, you're the first star of today's show. So thank you for putting this part of the presentation together. Farm broadcaster from WILL, Todd. Whenever you're ready, I will let you kick it off.
Well, hey, thank you. I appreciate you taking some time with me today, and I hope we have a good program set up for you. I know Jesse and I have talked a little bit. Of course, my name's Todd Gleason. I'm a farm broadcaster on campus. I have worked here on campus since being a student in 1985 at WILL. I actually work for University of Illinois Extension and in the College of ACES, or Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences. And I produce mostly radio for them, and I do have daily radio program that runs about 24 minutes in length, a second one that is a weekly that runs however long I want it to be. That one's called Commodity Week. I say however long I want it to be because while it goes on the air, I put that one digitally first a few years ago. So I don't care how long it goes, it just fades out at the end of the air, and I point them to our website or to our podcast. So let's talk just a little bit about what a podcast is. What is it? Guess what? It's radio. It is just radio with a different delivery system. I look out usually and think about assets for the radio and say, well, what are my assets? I'm on a WILL, which is AM 580, really low on the dial, covers a whole lot of area in the state. We'll get to that in just a second, but that's an antenna. And then there are other places to deliver as well. The website is one. And of course, the podcasting applications are another one. It's just another outlet in what I view as my radio network while I don't have a network. Let me repeat that. I'm a single radio station. I don't have a network, but I view this as a series of places that I can place audio, and it feels a whole lot more like a network. So let's start by making the case for podcasting. Let's make a case for podcasting. What is this case for podcasting? And what do we know about the way people use different platforms? Well, Nielsen in July released some work that they had done trying to figure out what percent of US adults were using individual platforms in any given month. So 91% of adults say in any given month they listen to the radio, AM or FM, and 90% are using live or time shifted television. Those first two are important, those are over the air. The next ones are important for our discussion today because they're all places you can actually get a podcast to: smartphones, connected TVs, PCs, and tablets. And they run from 57% down on tablets, which surprises me just a little bit, but I think people are consuming on their tablets in a different way than they do on their PCs, where radio, and on their smartphones, where radio or podcast is much like it is in a tractor cab or in the car or any place else. Radio really is just background noise, kind of like my telephone at this point. So how does farm content play in that process? Well, fortunately, NAFB earlier in the week sent us an email. I hope you read it. This is about the aim point research, and Jennifer Coleman put some points together. She wrote to us that 63% of those that they surveyed tune in to farm radio every day, and that's more than they get to in any other medium. So radio is still the primary delivery system. Of those, though, 83% listen to radio 5 days a week, and they have at least 11 radios on the farm, and about half of them have more than 20 radios on the farm. The infrastructure is there. That's an important point. I'll come back to that in just a second. That same report shows that younger listeners, those that are about 18 to 44, engage more often with digital media for ag content. What does that mean? It means that half of them, actually more than half, 54%, are going to YouTube and watching ag content on YouTube. Remember those numbers. That's a big number. Those people 18 to 44 really are using media in a different form. 63% are using social media, things like LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, or X as it's called these days, and 38% in live streams. 44% had listened to a podcast in the last month. 44% of our audience, 18 to 44, listened to a podcast in the last month. And here's one of the keynotes or the key takeaways from that particular email. You can go back and find it. It says digital online media consumption of agriculture content is more prevalent among younger farmers. I highlighted and bolded the and here because I think there are two pieces to this. And a high percentage of farmers report visiting a website after hearing about something on a farm broadcast program. That second part says if you mention a website on your farm broadcast, they're going to go find that website. A high percentage of them are going to go there. That's one important thing to remember. The first part, the digital online media consumption of agricultural content, is more prevalent among younger farmers. We don't get younger, we get older. So it's important because eventually we get older and we no longer listen, right? You need to have your content driven by a younger audience if you can. And one of the ways to do that is through the digital mediums. Here's a little piece of research that comes from Edison Research. I saw this earlier in the year. It's called the Share of Ear Survey. The blue line shows on-demand products and the listening habit during the day, percentage of share of all the audio listening. So in 2015, about 31% of the people say, yep, I'm using on-demand, but the rest of the time, for all the rest of the audio, it's closer to 69 or 70%. From 2015 to 2013, you can see that that has changed. And on demand actually is just slightly higher now in the percentage share of all audio listening today. So really it's right at 50-50, but it's something more like 49.5, 50.5 in favor of on demand. So show me the proof, you say, that this could work for me. Can a podcast work? I say yes. I say yes, it can. willag.org is the website for WILL. It's the ag programming. WILL's website is will.illinois.edu, and this website is actually will.illinois.edu/agriculture. I had to argue with them for a long time that it really needed its own URL. And it has one that connects directly to our page. If you go to willag.org, you will find that page. WILL has been broadcasting since 1922, for more than 100 years at this point. The current ag programming started in 1985, and it is also what we podcast today. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Our first podcast came in July of 2003. So let's talk more about the listenership at WILL. And we're only going to talk about the Illinois side. This is the AM, FM, and TV map of our radio signal, television signals as well. The AM signal is in red. It covers about 138 counties in Illinois and Indiana. That big red line in the middle is the dividing line between the two states. I know the numbers for Illinois listenership from NAFB because I have asked over the decades about them. I've never asked about them from Indiana. I don't know what they are. I am non-commercial. I don't use them to sell things. I just try to find out what these numbers are. And I checked again last fall. They have been 1,800 farmers for as long as I can remember. And I've been at the radio station since 1985. So that number's been really steady, which is pretty amazing over the decades, given this closing market report airs at 2:00 and it has competition in that time frame at this point in the afternoon as well. So this number 1,800 is pretty important to remember. That's an approximate number, kind of where I believe we set on the Illinois side of the border. Now I'm going to show you an analytical tool that we use at WILL called PodTrack. This is for the closing market report. This tracks how many times and the audience for the closing market report. So how many times it's downloaded. You can see in any given 30-day period, globally, it's downloaded about 4,500 times. That 480,562 is a nice number. I know that's kind of fun to look at, but it is, there's probably 10 years of data sitting in that number. On that point at this time, or at least maybe it's 5 years. I don't recall quite off the top of my head how long they've been tracking this through PodTrack. The number that is important are the numbers where it says audience. So while in the United States, the downloads are right around 4,000, over a month's time, there are about 1,588 people that are listening to the program. However, you'll make note that in commodity week or in the closing market report, you'll see it twice in the list over on the left. That's because there are actually two different feeds or sources for commodity week, and the other one's picking up about 237. So combined, that's about, if you pick up the 1588 and the 237, that's about 1800. So I've doubled the audience. Let me repeat that. Since 2003, we have doubled the farm audience. Now, I know that PodTrack's not just tracking farmers. However, if you have a program that starts out with markets and then comes back with an ag economist and follows it up with weather about the growing regions across the planet, it's pretty clear that you're going to mostly have farmers and others who are terribly interested in agriculture listening. So since 2003, I'm pretty certain that we have doubled our listenership by farmers. And that number's, I think that's extraordinary given what has been happening to the farm population. One last thing before we move on to farm population. The place that podcast plays, these are from PodTrack again, and how people are listening. 66% use Apple Podcasts, 11% use Spotify. Those numbers are not out of line with the industry in general. If you're going to play and you are looking to put your podcast someplace, without a doubt, Apple first, Spotify second, but be on both of them if nothing else. Be on both of those if nothing else, because Apple is just the behemoth and Spotify plays really well, but Apple dwarfs everybody. But those are the two places that you need to put your podcast. So let's talk still some more numbers. The Census of Agriculture just came out, right? And for 2022 was released earlier in the year. This is table 41 from the Census of Agriculture. I have a copy of it. You can send me a note. I will email you the PDF. There are some fun and important things here. Ignore the top lines first at 56,000. We're going to start with the very top line. Remember when this came out, everybody said, hey, we lost farms. So total number of farms, 1,900,487. Now I've highlighted the gray boxes there up at the top. So this says the fewest number of farms accounting for 10% of the sales. If you want to get 10% of gross sales in the United States from those 1,900,000 farms, you only have to contact 451 of them. Let me repeat that. To get to 10% of gross sales, you only have to get to 451. Only it's about 90,000 if you want to get 75% of them. Now drop down to the second set of gray boxes where it says grains, oilseeds, dry beans, and dry peas. So that's corn and beans and a couple of other things. They don't do corn and beans by themselves. There are 422,850 total grain and oilseed farms in the United States. To get to 10%, you only need to talk to 140 of them. To get to 75%, you only need to get to 56,876. So if you take that 3,600 listener number, 1,800 plus 1,800, and you divide it by 56,876, I'm reaching, and I'm going to guess this is really close, somewhere around 5 to 7% of my target audience. That's a number that Jesse's probably going to tell you that you can sell. I think he's probably going to tell you that you can sell that number at some point. So now let's talk a little bit about how you start a podcast and what I do differently with the content. You know what I do differently with the content? Nothing, zero, nada, nothing. The same thing that goes on the air goes in the feed. There is there are a couple of things that I have done to adjust the content to make sure that it works properly on both places. First and foremost is remember that while your radio station may pay to put music in your programming content, and if you're streaming it live, that's fine, it can go, but you don't have permission to put it into on-demand content. So you need royalty-free music in order to do that. I have used royalty-free music. The university paid for some things out of Nashville a couple of decades ago. And my brother's a very good guitarist, has written some tunes. I use him on my radio programming. And so he writes the theme music for the closing market report. The podcast is nothing more than an RSS feed. This is really old computer language. It stands for really simple syndication. If you're used to using and following people on blogs, a blog is an RSS feed. A podcast is an RSS feed for audio, and it's really very simple. Used to have to know a lot of the back end of this to figure out how to do it. You don't have to today. You can go to a whole bunch of different places and they will serve up your programming content. And if you search for places that will provide and host for podcasts, these are some of them that you'll come up with. This is the way it really works. I borrowed this from Buzzsprout. And I think it gives you the best idea of how things happen. You're probably already used to creating a file or an MP3 file or something that goes on the radio that gets played, unless you're doing everything live. But even then, you're probably recording and creating a file, and you put that and that's on your computer. In this case, rather than putting it into the automation for the radio station, if that's what you do, you move it to the host, in this case, as we see here, Buzzsprout, and they have a server that sends it out with back-end hooks already built in, so you don't have to really understand how to do this, into Apple and Spotify. Those are the top one and the green one to the right of it. And then all kinds of other places like TuneIn and iHeartRadio. Google Podcast, which is going to go away at the end of the week and change to YouTube in some form, though Google's not been clear exactly as content creators how we pull that off. They haven't sent us anything, nor, by the way, have they sent Buzzsprout or any place else, to the best of my knowledge, anything in the last month about how to do that. Here are the two places that I use as host. They're both important, and I still use both of them. The one on the right in the white is called SoundCloud. This is important because if you want to try this out for free, you can do it on SoundCloud. You can figure out how it all works on SoundCloud. This is really meant for musicians. For 10 years, I paid for a SoundCloud account at that $8.25 a month, or around $100 a year, or 120, or whatever it happened to be. For about a decade, I paid for it because the University of Illinois has a difficult problem with recurring dollars. And so I thought it was important, so I just paid for it. And I also wanted to learn how it worked. And I keep it today because I want to. Now, the free version is interesting because it allows you to upload up to 3 hours of content. The fun part about that is if you get to 3 hours and you take 20 minutes off, you can add a new 20 minutes. So it's 3 hours of rolling content. So if you want to try and just figure it out for free, go to SoundCloud and you can manage your way through this. The other side is transistor.fm. Transistor is the name, but it's transistor.fm online. And it is what I use and the university uses to host our podcast programming. Actually, we use both Transistor, and the radio station has its own RSS feed built in. That's why there were two different versions of the closing market report. The RSS feed from the radio station feeds the website. The RSS feed from Transistor feeds all of the podcast programming. 2 years ago, when I convinced the university that we needed one of these, um, Transistor that is, they bought it, and they bought the $99 or the business class. It cost us $1,000 a year. Today, what we bought for $1,000 a year 2 years ago cost $19 a month. So the cost has gone down dramatically. The things you get for the upgraded cost are if you want to put something in as a pre-roll, like an ad, in as a pre-roll, a mid-roll, or a post-roll, they'll do that. It does dynamic show notes, so you don't have to write everything out yourself. And it will auto post to YouTube. I have not tried that yet at this point, but I can do that. I've just not decided which of the three different podcasts that I produce that I'd like to put in there, if any of them. I produce three: the Closing Market Report we've been talking about, Commodity Week, the weekly program, and one called the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy podcast. So we're going to go into the Closing Market Report, saying, and teach you shortly how I do this on a daily basis. Again, this is a daily program. I finish up at about 1:40 with the Closing Market Report with the file for the 2 o'clock show. At that point, I open and send it off to the radio station, and I pick the same file up and I go to transistor.fm. I hit the little tag up there that says new episode. Oh, that 118,000 downloads is 2 years, by the way. I hit that little new episode, and it opens up a page that looks like this. It says, hey, what's the name of this? And I have a naming convention, which is the date and Closing Market Report. So for today, it says March 27, the Closing Market Report. And then I just drag and drop the audio file onto it. And there are a couple of other things I do, like put some information in about who's on the program, and I hit save. And once I've done that, we're pretty good. Oh, and if I make a mistake, like today, I did not catch that when I was editing the file together, that it didn't automatically adjust the gain on what I had recorded. And so it was too hot. And I sent a file out that was too hot. And 2 minutes later, I realized it. And all I had to do was drop it back in, and it will replace it automatically in the podcast feed, which is super nice if you make a mistake. And I did the same thing for the radio station. They got the updated file about 10 minutes before it had to air, so it did air properly there as well. Here's what the podcast player looks like from Transistor. That player, the white part there at the top that has the CMR logo on it, is one of the reasons I picked Transistor, because I thought it was easy to use, because it has a button that says subscribe, share, and more information on it. The more information button shows basically what you see down below there, Kurt Kimmel and Colin Waters. This is from the Monday radio program. And so those were important to me, and one of the reasons I actually decided Transistor was a place to use as a hosting program for the Closing Market Report and the other podcasts we produce here on campus. If you hit subscribe, it allows your end user to go ahead and subscribe using almost everything that's available. You'll see Amazon Music is there. I don't see Audible there, though you can subscribe to the Closing Market Report through Audible, Pandora as well. Apple Podcast and Spotify, of course, are there at this point. And you can also have them share, if they like, using, Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, or they can copy from a couple of places up there at the top. They can copy the feed and send it off to somebody else if they want. And if they really wanted to, I allow them to embed these files wherever they want. We can talk about what that means, really. But again, This is just for me about ease of use and how quickly you can get things off to Spotify and Apple and Amazon Music and Audible and Pocket Cast and Podcast Addict and Deezer and Player FM. And the list just goes on and on for where it has the back end hooks. And you no longer have to understand how to do that stuff. I had to learn how to do it and how to put it in through the back end side. And I have accounts for everybody, and I know how to go in and find and use those accounts, but it's way easier if somebody else does it for you. And that's what Transistor, Podbean, and many of the rest of them will do for you. This is what the embedded player looks like for the closing market report. So you can set it up so that it will show just the current one. So it's just the white part there at the top, and they hit play button and it plays for 23 minutes and 50 seconds. But you can also have it show a playlist. So for the closing market report, because I'm still a radio guy at heart, I think it's fleeting and I don't want them to be able to go back 5 years and listen to it. I could find it, but I don't want them to be able to find it easily. So I let them go back a week and no more. So there's a rolling six for the closing market report that they can listen to. And if they heard something earlier in the week, they can go back and listen again if they would like. Here's what the website looks like. I told you earlier that there were two different podcast feeds, the RSS feed at the radio station, which works effectively the same way as the transistor does, in kind of meaning I have to do the same amount of work to upload the files. You can just click and play those buttons at the top, and they will play the closing market report and commodity week. I have a podcast tab there where they can see the embedded file from the actual, what I think about as the podcast for the closing market report, the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction podcast, and commodity week. There's also a tab there for USDA reports. If you want to go to willag.org and see those, I embed dynamic tables from Google Sheets into the website, which update when I cut and paste from the Excel spreadsheet for the USDA reports into it automatically. And I don't have to get into the back end of the website. The IT people rarely like any of us to get into the back end of the website. So I try to find ways around it. So here are a couple of closing thoughts from me before we get to Jess Allen. I learned and really like, because I'm techie, to learn about different ways to do things by creating a blogger account from Google. This is a blog account. It's free. You can buy a URL for it, and then I just play. I mess with this all the time. I did buy a URL for it, which is, $12 a year, that they just don't cost anything. So this web page cost me $12 for narrowrow.com. And I don't play as much as I used to because I've gotten pretty used to it. But I used to change this thing all the time. I would go into the back end of this so I could figure out how the IT people were doing the websites. So I could cheat the website, which is what I still do today. That's the reason WILL's website has the ag programming in it is I cheat. It has an RSS feed in there from the farm doc team that I stole from the university, roughly speaking, because I want news from the farm doc team there. But that RSS feed also has it feeds off of, it could feed off of as many RSS places that I could capture. And I have it captured the last 8 stories from 3 different websites. So it says, what are the last 8, not from each website, but all 3 combined, what are the last 3 by date? And it just rotates through them. So every day I have fresh news, print news on the radio station from campus, from the farm doc team, the crop scientist, and the animal scientist. And then, of course, the daily updated programming. And that is the end of my program, Jess. And let me see if I can get out of this, and I will turn things back over to you. Let's see, do I need to
Okay.
stop sharing at this point? I think. But it's been too. There we go. Thank you. Oh, thank you on the
Sure.
other end, Michael, for doing that. I appreciate that. And Jess, the floor is yours. And then in just a bit, we'll take some questions too.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Todd. That was very, very well put together. Great, great thoughts. So I'll go ahead and share my screen as well to kind of pick this up. And all right. And I'll go through some of my examples of what I use as well here in just a little bit. But I just want to start and echo some of the things that Todd was talking about as well when it comes to podcasting. So let me get over to where I can present here a few of my slides real quick. All right. And so to Todd's point, he made a great one earlier that I want to start with, and I need to get to the front. So we're going to talk a little bit about monetizing your podcast as well and kind of tying this all into what Todd was talking about. And here's the thing is that we are already great broadcasters, and by default that means we are good podcasters too. And I'm going to restart this thing because it did not cooperate with me. There we go. Maybe. There it is. All right. So to Todd's point, think of your podcast like a radio station, just that you don't have a signal border to it. There's no limits to your reach, and some people may disagree with me on that, maybe not look at it that way, but it's the way you really should think about it in 2024. A podcast is like a radio station, so let's treat it like a radio station when it comes to your thoughts on selling and monetizing it, things like that. You can use a lot of the same formulas that your sales teams already use on radio, sell a podcast. There's just so much that ties in with it. Um, and the other aspect of this too, that's been a big thing that I wanted to talk about is video podcasting. I have done a lot of video podcasting with Market Talk since I started that program in 2020. It's now evolved into a syndicated radio show as well and more. But from the get go, I started video and audio and was posting the full program every weekday to YouTube. And seriously, it is very easy. There is no barrier to entry to getting into video podcasting. It's just another added avenue to help monetize your podcast and your work. Think of it this way. And there's a few examples I have down there of some of the easy video podcasting type streaming services you can use. I use StreamYard, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But literally with StreamYard, you can download your audio and video separately. So you could go record a full interview with someone, and instead of having to worry about how you're going to get all the audio and this and that, it gives you a little handy button that says, "Oh, download the MP3 of the recording you just did." So you can go drop it in Adobe Audition or whatever the case is, edit it, add some intro, outro music for a podcast, and post it to a Libsyn or a Podbean or a Buzzsprout. Some of the different examples Todd was talking about. You can easily do that with StreamYard. A lot of these other ones are the same. Riverside.fm, Restream, Wirecast, Zoom and Teams to some degree allow you to do that as well. I don't think they have as much functionality as some of the others, but the ability is there to do that. Now, monetizing is not scary. Let me give you an example here. One of the first sponsors I had on Market Talk was Growmark. And really, with me doing video and audio, gave them opportunities to have their logos on the video content. Also, run a pre roll type of video commercial. Same for the audio side. We could put their ads into the audio and embed those. There's a lot of different options there. But think about this. Maybe you have an interview, say it's a 10-minute interview, and you only have room to air 3 minutes of that on your radio station. Well, guess what? You could create a package, maybe a series, say it's with BASF, for instance, and you could share teasers, clips of that interview on your station or on your network and say, hey, for the full BASF content podcast series, whatever you call it, go to our podcast channel, go to our website and find it, or find it where you download your favorite podcasts on Apple or Spotify, or maybe it's a video and say, hey, go to our YouTube channel. In my case, go to youtube.com/@markettalkag, and you can find all of the full conversation. conversation brought to you by BASF. There's ways to massage this and make a package together. You have to look at it as it is a radio station. It is an extension of your radio station and your radio network is what podcasting can be for you. And I mentioned this earlier. We're already great podcasters or great broadcasters, and that by default makes us great podcasters too, because we're not doing anything different. We're not doing anything different. We're already doing this job day in and day out on AM and FM radio stations. Guess what? We could do it online as well. And I know a lot of people are already doing it. Some people maybe haven't figured out how to navigate it, but there is so much opportunity out there that we can take advantage of. I'm going to show a couple examples here of my screen as well. So for instance, like I said, I have a pretty big YouTube focus. Well, when I record every day, my market portion for the full market talk, I focus on the video first. I go through my StreamYard and record my entire market analysis video. I just got done with this one today with Mike Zuzolo, and that was posted about a half hour ago. It's 19 minutes long. Well, then after I would record that, I'd post the full video to YouTube to share out and use this avenue to get to farmers, much to Todd's point about how a lot of 18 to 44 are going to YouTube to look for ag content. Well, then in StreamYard, back to the point of when I was talking about being able to download the audio separately, here's a quick look at StreamYard. And for instance, if I go into the past recordings, here's today, Wednesday, March 27th, download, ta-da, the full recording of the video, the audio only recording, and it even gives you a transcript. Now, there's a lot of options with StreamYard. They have options for going live on social media as well. That was really how it's built, but I use it more as a recording platform and then do some minor editing in the background. But I would take the audio, download it, split it into 2 segments, and then upload it as the radio show. Also, we'll upload the audio, the full show that I do every day, into Libsyn is what I use. This is kind of the back end of Libsyn, very similar to what Todd was showing with what he uses with Transistor, etc. And these services, again, make it so easy for you to share your content. Once you initially set things up, it goes to Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you name it. You go through, you add your details, all of that stuff, your artwork for the channel, things like that. You can do all this. You can set it up. There's another component, though, that is an added step that can come back for your sales team when I talk about monetizing. Another cool feature, I use Libsyn Pro. We pay for the upgraded service. I can add advertising in pre-roll, mid-roll, end roll, and I can geo-target that advertising. A lot of these services, their pro versions, give you that opportunity to geo-target ads. So say you have a company that maybe they're restricted to advertising in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin, and they don't want to have anyone outside of those 3 states hear their advertisement. They would get in trouble maybe for some reason due to regulations or whatever the case is. Well, you go into your podcast and you can geo-target that advertisement to only air in those states. You can even geo-target it down to a specific DMA, a specific, TV market, radio market, so to speak. So there's a lot of options there. If you want to really make it a hyper local type thing, if you're putting together a package, you can do that, or you can just pop everything in if there's no restrictions and let it run, and it can be downloaded worldwide. So there's a lot of options there. This is the similar thing to what Todd was showing. This is the standalone Market Talk Libsyn webpage they create. But I also, on our website, have links to all of the various on-demand sources, a link to our YouTube channel, and then on the homepage embed the Spotify and the Apple links, and those update rolling, same as Todd's does. And I just haven't gotten today's final episode posted there yet. But overall, when it comes back to it, again, you have to think about it as a radio station or an extension of your radio station when it comes to monetizing it. And I'm happy to answer questions for folks in a one-to-one type of basis as well. But I know we'll kind of open it up for questions here and things like that. But just know that it's not scary. And I will add this as well. Thinking about video podcasting, for instance, everybody's got a phone, right? This is my camera for my video podcasts. And in my studio here, how minimal my setup is. I'm going to see if I could actually do this real fast here. I think I can, if it will let me. I think I could switch my video to my iPhone camera. See, there it is. It's backwards, but there is my studio in my house. I mounted a cheap TV on the wall to put up some backgrounds. I swing my microphone over, the same microphone I'm talking into, swing that over, move myself around, and record my video that way. I'm literally doing this with minimal equipment. You can obviously upgrade and do much more, but the barrier to entry is extremely small when it comes to video podcasting, and it can be an added extension. But if you don't want to be on camera, just do the audio side. There's still a lot of opportunity there when it comes to monetizing what you're doing. So with that, I will stop talking. I will stop sharing my screen. And
Just I've got a question for you. And like
you bet.
you, I used to have I've done television. I got rid of the TV guys a long in 2015. We used to have all kinds of gear for television, and I'm with you. This is what I use. Even for broadcast news. The first time I used an iPhone was for broadcast news. It was an iPhone 4, not 14, 4. 4. They just shoot that well. And today, it's in your pocket. It has great audio on it. Just even if you just want to record your audio, probably a lot of you do, you can use it. But for video, it is fantastic. So, how much extra time a day, and maybe you don't know this, but I do, does it take you to manage your podcast as opposed to the radio station?
10 minutes.
Yep.
I mean,
10 minutes.
it's
10
very
minutes.
minimal.
10 minutes. I finish up at I finish up around 1:40 with the closing market report. By 2 o'clock, everything is done. That includes moving it to the radio station for
Yeah.
yeah.
And Todd, with that, I mean, if you get it down to a science and know all the little pieces, then it can be very quick. For instance, I will record part of my radio show around 12:30, 1 o'clock, the opening kind of part that's not with the analysis side, that doesn't go on YouTube or anything. It's literally for radio, and I use it for
Yep.
podcast. We'll get that uploaded ahead of time to give me a little buffer. But around 1:30 every day is when I record my market segment. I'll go 15 to 20 minutes with my analyst through
Mm-hmm.
StreamYard, download that, immediately chop it into 2 segments, upload it for radio so I'm on time and don't miss the segment, and then turn around, take the full video I downloaded, add a front roll to it, put it on YouTube, done. Same with the audio, put all the audio together for the podcast, the 3-4 segments I had from the radio show, they go together into a podcast through Libsyn, out the door. I can have a full video, audio, radio show, and podcast done probably half hour to 40 minutes tops. And that's
Yep. Yeah.
it's very
it's
easy
just
to
not
do.
taking extra time. That
No.
was my point. It's
Yeah.
pretty simple to do, and don't be scared that you can't do remotes with them as well.
Mhm.
So it is different. So do you do? I don't do. I used to do live all the time. Live remotes are far more difficult and way more stressful. Once we hit COVID, I stopped doing that. But I also travel 40 to 60 days a year.
Mhm.
And I still use the same timeline. I mean, I don't change my timeline, relatively speaking. I'm still uploading. I'm still finishing between 1:30 and 2 o'clock, and still, and again, it's this, right? Because I'm
Mhm.
connecting here to my phone for the internet a lot of the time. I do check when I leave what kind of coverage I'm going to have. I have been caught twice since 2015 where I could not get a program back. Both times my fault. Both
Mhm.
times were my fault. But traveling with it is just not that big a deal. And the
No.
podcast, the thing about the podcast is it's not timed, it's only yours. So that doesn't add stress to the idea. If you're really trying to get the remote back on time, it's about the radio station and that time. But the podcast, if you're late, people will notice. I actually put down on the website, you'll make note that I have times that it will be delivered. So it says 3 o'clock for the podcast, though it gets delivered the same time at 1:45 or so.
Mhm.
But I do put times there because I think people, they just like to have a time. Can I come here and will it be updated? They like to know when that happens. So I try to do that as well.
And
I think,
yeah, and I would add to that too. I mean, for me, it's about the same. It's when I'm traveling, if you're podcasting, I focus a little more on the radio side first and then upload things after the fact. And I think people sometimes know when I'm traveling, they know that, okay, hey, it might be a little late, but my model's a little different in that most of it is up by 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and a lot of people watch it in the evening on YouTube or early the next morning, that kind of thing, or listen that way if they don't catch it on the radio. So I guess it's one of those things when traveling or just the overall in general about a podcast. I think of the old term that one of my first bosses told me: keep it simple, stupid.
mhm,
And that's what it comes down to when you're podcasting. We are already essentially doing this. And think about this, we record so much content and maybe you would get a great 10, 20 minutes with someone and you only use 3 of it. What happens to the rest of it? Does it just die on a hard drive?
nope.
Well, no, you can utilize it by putting it on a podcast and
Yeah.
direct listeners to go there and listen to it. And by them going there to listen to it, it creates another easy revenue opportunity to package together with what your sales team is already doing for on air. It's just, it should be, to what I said, an
Yeah.
extension of what you're
It,
already doing.
and if you don't do that, and I will do this about 10 or 15 times a year where I have too much content for the daily closing market report, but the one online is 6 or 7 minutes longer than the one on
Mhm.
here. It doesn't happen very often, but there are times where I just end up with too much content. The interview is too long, but I think it is worthwhile, and I just run it. And
And,
it's
and,
fantastic to be able to do
and Yeah, and there's one thing too, as you get better at doing it, because like I obviously kind of, I think always think about radio in the back of my head when I'm recording my video and my audio, podcast every day. But say if you go watch my YouTube video, that's the unedited version. You can clearly see around that 10-minute mark where I do a reintroduction of my guest.
Yep.
Well, guess
That's where
what?
you stop the radio spot, right?
That's where I cut for radio, and I've just learned to do that, and it
Yeah.
ebbs and flows. One day it might be 9:50, it might be 10:40 or whatever,
Yeah.
but I know that, hey, my first segment's 11 minutes long, so I gotta cut it somewhere, and I've had days where I've gone over and I've had to go back and do some real fast editing to get it to fit, because it's gotta be 11 minutes long on that first segment and then 12, but there's as you do it, it gets easier, and
Yep.
you just need to switch your thinking a little bit from just doing a interview on radio. I mean, but to your point, Todd, if you're not worried about time as well, then you don't have to worry about time
I don't
constraints.
know. I've never gotten rid of the back timing clock in my head, right? From doing
Yeah.
live radio. Which is what you were doing
Yeah.
with your YouTube segment. Your back time, and I back time it with the recorder has a time for how long I've been doing the interview. They all do, right? So I when I bring back, I always look at how long I've been recording with them, and we all know how long a minute is, and how long a 30 seconds is, and how long 10 seconds is, without actually having a clock. I mean, and so I'll look and then I'll back time in my head and try to hit the time as close as I can. And music does a lot of buffers, right? You can make things end right pretty easily. So it's not too
Mhm.
hard. You just the back timing is just in a different form than with a clock and an actual deadline on the radio. So
And
I don't know.
yeah,
Go
there
on.
are any questions. I was just going to add one final brief point that we kind of touched on, but we didn't. When I mentioned, the video barrier to entry is very small. You can obviously upgrade your cameras and things like that. But in terms of the audio side, well, guess what? We already have the equipment we need. We have good microphones. We have our boards in our studios, things like that, or we have a decent little interface or roadcaster with our laptops that gives us good audio quality. So chances are you already have 90% of the equipment you need to start doing podcasts.
And it's better than 99% of what everybody else is using on a podcast.
Yep. So
Are there questions? Y'all have microphones. I'm pretty
put everyone to sleep,
Remember
Todd.
to hit that unmute button and feel free to chime in and ask a question, folks.
I would just say have fun with it, because once you get over the hurdle of looking at the numbers and seeing how many clicks you got or how many comments, once you get past that and you just enjoy it, that's when I think the podcast really grows. When you quit focusing on, oh my gosh, I only got 800 views, or I only got, 75 likes. Get past all of that and just be you. And you'll find out how quick that will all change.
Well, and Susan too. I know Susan's another StreamYard user for some of her video podcast content as well. And I mean, I talked about the ease of use of a program like that to give you video and audio. I mean, Susan, you could talk about that as well, how easy something like that is to use when you're doing all this stuff too.
Oh, it's very easy. I wish I would have invented StreamYard, to be honest with you, because I wouldn't be in radio. No, yes, I would. I think the ease of it and the editing quality of it, it's not just radio folks that are using it. I mean, we're talking the NBCs, the Foxes, the CBSs, all utilizing StreamYard, because with one, you can have one person, you doing the program, be the producer at the same time, and can be pulling and switching screens, and it just flows so nice, and you get a finished product that you can later embed B-roll. Or I have friends who have all their B-roll lined up, and the minute somebody starts talking about something, they click it and the B-roll shows up. I like to do it after the fact, but that's just me. But then you can instantly glean that audio from that video, and it's crystal clear, and turn around and make it a podcast with no effort at all.
Yeah.
So
There's a lot of easy uses there.
And Nicole asked a question. She wants to know if we're constructing in a certain way for the podcast, or just dropping radio programs in. You clearly you have different links for different things. I simply pick up the radio program intros and it drops in. Now I am public radio, so it's 24 minutes long, and there are no ads at all in it. So it is just one. There are different segments. So there's an introduction, and then I do the numbers from the board, followed by an analyst and news and an interview and a weather forecast. And they're all different segments, but they're all, there's nothing that I do that's any different for the podcast than for the radio.
And I'll add to that for Nicole's question. I drop in the 4 radio segments I have typically, but there are multiple ways, and that's the beauty of podcasting. You can set this up however you want. If it's something where it's not really going to radio and it's specifically podcast, I think Delaney Howell does this with her Ag News Daily podcast. She'll open with a quote, and then they might have a ad play, like a pre-roll ad, and then they'll go into a quick intro, and then they'll get into their interview. There's multiple ways to set this up. It's really what best fits what you are doing. That's the beauty of it. So like for me, for instance, like I said, I'm dropping in segment 1 radio show. There's a break. I might throw in some promos in between if I don't have paid ads, or if I have geo-targeted stuff, I will go in the back end and geo-target it to hit between segment 1 and segment 2. For instance, if it's at 13 minutes, I'll make sure the geo-target ad would play there for someone and go on down the line. So there's some added extra steps if you get into that aspect. That's not too much more work, but really it comes down to it's however you want to build it. That's the beauty. There's no restrictions. And I see Bryce's question too about successful revenue streams for podcasts, and kind of touched on that a little bit. And kind of just to reiterate, really think of a podcast as an extension of what you're doing on the radio. Treat it the same. A lot of these agencies, a lot of these companies, they want to look at your download data and your metrics data. And I feel that there is a way right now, especially if you're just starting something brand new, leverage what you already do on the radio to tie it in with some podcasts to create a broader package to take to a client to say, hey, by the way, for this price, a little extra, maybe we're going to add in all this added stuff. It really, for me, from my perspective, my revenue streams have largely come from a whole package of, hey, it's radio, it's video, it's audio podcast, all three together. Plus, you throw in some banner ads on a website and all that great earned media added value kind of thing that we all love. Um, and that's the package for a certain price is kind of what it ends up being. You just have to, you can't overcomplicate it, I guess is the biggest thing when you're thinking about revenue streams. And as podcasts grow, don't get caught up in the clicks and the downloads. Like Susan said, just let it go, have fun.
Yep.
And hopefully your sales team can, build a package around it and watch it grow. That's the best advice I could say when it comes to revenue streams. There's more to it too. I know we just started to get monetization on our YouTube channel because we got over 1,000 subscribers on that, which you need in order for YouTube to let you make 7 cents a view or something like that. So, it's there's a lot of opportunities out there. I guess you just have to keep it simple.
Yeah.
The two of you, a good question and something to keep in mind for folks. Can you just talk about not to get discouraged when you only have maybe 30 downloads a day or 15 or 20 and how that audience is still very niche and also marketable for monetization?
For instance, for me, it took me 4 years to get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube when I started at nothing. Some of my first videos and audio downloads had maybe 10 downloads, 10 views,
Yeah.
20, things like that. Like it was very much starting from nowhere and built and built and built as it went. You just can't get discouraged. You just have to persist through it, get used to putting it together and doing it, make it part of your daily routine if you're super serious about it. That's the other thing too, is that if you're infrequent with what you're putting out there for podcasts, say if you set your listeners up and to say, okay, this is a weekly thing or a bi-weekly or monthly, then they expect that. But if they expect something every day and then you do something on Monday and then, oh, well, I don't have time until Thursday, I'll do another one.
Yeah, that's failure
They're
there.
going to lose interest.
Yeah.
So,
and agreed. And it's like, so it's another radio station, but I just look at them all as assets. In 2011 or 12, when I started with Twitter, you didn't have any followers on Twitter, but I viewed it as just another radio outlet. And every day, it's actually in that 20-minute span, Twitter still remains one of the place. As soon as I finish the podcast being loaded, because it has a player for Twitter, it goes out every day. And at 1:45, 2:00, and they expect to see it there. I really think they do. And so, and I just view Twitter as a radio station as well. It's just another radio station for me, one that I can chat on. But it works. I will say, the reason that we started in 2001, we're at the university, but it was because the consolidation within the agricultural industry had hurt terribly the number of farm broadcasters. They dropped by half at that time, Susan, I think. I can't remember quite what the number was, but it was incredible, the number of our broadcasters we lost because the consolidation with the industry, the ad revenue disappeared. At the same time, WILL, because we're on campus, had and still does have an HD channel. It wasn't clear that WILL would, or any radio station would carry the ag audience for very long. One, because on WILL they have to pay. I mean, relatively speaking, when I ask for dollars, we want them to give money, and they still do. And we don't raise that much ad revenue, or very much at all, And so our thought at that point was, well, first, will they keep us on AM? Second, will AM be around? And if they're not, how do we make sure that farm broadcast from from campus or from any place continues to survive? And we at that point, Dave Dickey and I picked up, and actually I just picked up the phone and showed. I said, "We got to be here. This is the place. This is where we have to be. This is where we have to aim for. We have to have a big enough audience on the web, on the smartphone. This is the target,
Mhm.
and it was our target that we can survive without the radio station." If they take us off the radio station. I think I don't know whether the rest of you all live that way, but I certainly, it wasn't something I thought that I was going to ever really have a problem with, but I could. Uh, and that's why it was another outlet and one that I could control
Mhm.
more
Well, and Todd,
more than I could.
yeah, to your point, real fast too, thinking about um and to what Michael said about being niche audiences and small downloads. I mean,
Yeah.
it also comes back to what exact content you're putting out. For instance, like what Todd's does and what I do, we're talking commodity markets. I
Yeah.
mean, at the end of the day, I don't think someone, unless they're super interested in 30 minutes worth of commodity market discussion, they're not downloading and listening. So that's something that you can really drive
Yeah.
home
I know.
to
Yeah.
listeners,
Yeah.
Now if you're doing a broad story about something, you're picking tree nuts or something like that. I mean, then that might be downloaded by more than just a farm and ranch audience. But I think we have already such a niche audience on the air that a lot of that same audience is probably looking at our podcast content or wants to. And so again, it's perseverance. Start somewhere,
Yep.
get started, and just think of it as an added extra 5-10 minute step as you maybe do an interview with a senator or your congressman or something, or whatever the case may be, an economist. Say, okay, I used a couple of clips from that in a news story, and now you can listen to the full program on our podcast feed. Go to our WIL Spotify channel or
Yep.
whatever your station is.
Oh,
Make
and
sure
be
you use that
relentless. And
content
I'm relentless on the air. Are you relentless on the air with
to some
driving?
degree.
Oh, I am. I
Yeah.
drive them to the website probably 5 to 7 times in a half hour, and I mentioned the podcast probably 3. I just we don't have ads, but that is the one place I am relentless.
We drive to YouTube simply
Yeah.
because that's our focus, is that we've really honed in on the YouTube channel and the focus there. Because to your point with your research, a lot of folks are going to YouTube to find ag content.
I'm
That's where
coming.
we've driven
I'm coming.
things.
I don't want to, but I'm coming anyway.
Yeah. But I mean, it really, all of this, it comes back to simply find what works for you. There are 1,000,001 tools available out there for podcasting. We're already doing most of the legwork anyway. It's just an added extra 5 to 10 minute step every day.
But what's funny is that the barrier to entry has never really been about money because we
Nope.
already have the tools. So it's not about money. The barrier to entry when I first started was how techy are you? Can you figure it out on your own? And that mostly has disappeared.
Mm-hmm. And I think most of the folks in this group, it's not, there's some people where it's a willingness, but I think most of the folks in this group are willing to do it. Just got to connect some of the dots and realize how easy it really is. So,
Yep. Everybody knows Caesar. He can do it. He does it.
I have a
Yeah.
question if you're willing to entertain it.
you bet.
Sure.
It sounds like a lot of the podcasting you're referring to is basically like long form interviews. I'm wondering if you two or maybe anybody else on this call can speak to like more produced podcasts with voiceovers and different sounds, and maybe how you manage your time doing those, how long those podcasts are. If I'm just curious to get some people's thoughts on that.
So I can talk a little bit about that. If you go to youtube.com/@farmdoc, so the FarmDoc team has its own YouTube channel, and Jim Baltz produces a lot of that, and they do something called a 5-minute video, so you can see how many you can see how many times those are watched. But we do webinar on that particular channel. We do webinars. We do 5-minute little videos that are really well produced on ag econ topics. I have a couple of videos there myself. I don't put too much there, but it works, and it works really well. The ag keep that is a Goliath. I mean, it's enormous. It is the YouTube channel and the whole Farm Doc site
Mhm.
is a media company all on its own, within the college. When they first started and said that the Ag Economists were going to put up a new article every day of the week, I keeled, thinking there's no way they'll do this, and they've been doing it for 20 years or 25 years now. But they added, we do webinars consistently and constantly there, so those are very long form hours. We generally will have somewhere between I bet we average 150 over time, for a whole hour during the day on that. But the short ones, they'll have a tremendous number of views, and there are 3,300 subscribers, I think, to that channel as well. So it works, and the short form works as well.
I'll say this to that point, Alex. I've never really experienced or experimented with doing a lot of the fully produced, some of those like you listen to a crime podcast and they do a lot of their interweaving and editing and things like that. It's, it's, if you want to get into that and do all of that, by all means, you certainly can. It's just, if you want to be an editing person, I will say the argument, and it may be an unpopular one, but I think all the fancy editing and the drop-ins and this and that and whatnot, I think a lot of people probably don't care if your content you're presenting is good. You have to have good,
They
solid
don't even
content
care
that
if we
people
switch
want to
mics
listen
in the
to.
middle of our programs. I mean, they don't. They they don't even notice it, which is weird to me if you switch a mic in the middle of the program. So, but yes,
That's kind of why I treat what I do as I treat podcasts like an extended radio station, just be and long form interview kind of thing, because I just make sure the content above all else is something that's going to keep them engaged and intrigued. Now, if you are wanting to build a series on bird flu, for instance, that's going to be a 4, 5, 6 part series, and you want to get into some of the different editing, and maybe you have a 2-hour long interview that you have to chop up and do some teasers and things. That is, I mean, definitely, if you want to do the work, go for it. And I think it has plenty of merit, but I also think the general amount of the population that's downloading stuff, probably it's 6 half 1 dozen to another to them if we do that to some degree. As long as the content is strong.
If the content is really strong, I'll argue from the NPR side, from the public radio side, that because those are mostly highly produced programming content and have the largest listenership of podcast in general, that it does work. And to be honest, as somebody who likes to do that kind of stuff, there is nothing more gratifying than putting together a package that's really for me, that's really well edited. I don't have as much time to do that anymore, and I don't often, and I miss it still.
You can put as much effort into this as you want, and just going off my experience, I have a freelance client that I've worked with in the past where we'll do a 10 to 20 minute podcast, but the editing process takes about 45 minutes per 5 minutes of audio because of how much we put into it. Now that's listening to every second, changing things.
So you know what our time for public radio feature is for every minute we produce, including the time you're out, but 2 hours. 2 hours for every minute. For every minute of produced piece.
And I'll add this caveat from a monetization standpoint. I have not gone down the rabbit hole of trying to do crazy editing and teasers and You know, I've gotten into to reels and shorts a little bit on YouTube, and actually using AI to clip up my videos to give me a little teaser things for viral TikToks and reels and stuff. But at the end of the day, we've made money doing things the way we're doing it and treating it like a radio station. So getting super fancy with it and adding more time, that's kind of where my point comes from.
Yeah.
It may
Time
not
is
really
money.
be that necessary. If you can make money just sharing the long form content that you're doing, you know, it just depends on how much love and work you want to put into making something, you know, extremely edited and put together, or simply just strong content that's set up and presented nicely, and bing bang boom, you're out the door.
Michael, if I remember right, we're scheduled to be done at 4:15, regardless
Yeah.
of whether we're talking or not, correct?
I fear you guys could probably talk through the rest of the evening on the
We
topic,
could.
but we do have to eventually wrap this up. So
Yep.
This has been really good, guys. Thanks a lot.
You bet.
I've gained a lot from this. Michael, when will this be available on video?
yeah, so the plan is to get it uploaded to YouTube for tomorrow and distribute it out to Broadcast Council members then as well. So,
And I will just add, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out on a one-to-one basis. To me, Todd,
I do
I'm
this
sure
all the time.
we'd all be happy to talk. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions, video, audio, whatever. Reach out.
I spent an hour with somebody on campus yesterday who wanted to start a podcast, so I'm available too.
all right. Well, gentlemen, thank you, and thanks for everyone who is attending or will see this on YouTube as well. But a big thanks to Todd and Jesse and Mike and the folks behind NAFB Academy. We couldn't do it without the volunteers, and they really put a lot of time into this. So thank you guys, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Really
everybody.
good, guys. Thank you.